Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is my co-host on many other platforms. Lately, you saw her yesterday on Grill and Books, where we talked about Anna Julia Cooper. She is an attorney by profession and numerous hosts by whatever, author, Kwanzaa, a celebration. Miss Aya Fubara Eneli Esquire. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
The comrade needs all the flowers he can give him while he's still with us, and we should continue to do that. He is the host, Black Star News on WBAI, author of Manufacturing Hate, and what can I say? The good brother is always here to help guide us in the course of this conversation. Welcome, comrade.
Asante. Thank you.
Yes, as usual, we begin the news where you're at. Let's begin with the sister. She is on the move, so I'm sure lots of news caught our eyes, so go for it.
Currently, I'm trying to get out of Baltimore. Trump has decided to break the United States of America the same way he broke every business that he was ever involved in. And so the security lines to go through, you got the TSA to go through the security lines to be able to board your flight. Yesterday were 5.5 to 6 hours long.
Yeah.
So we're going to see if I can get on a flight to get home today.
Man.
What's going to happen? Yes. So we can't pay the TSA workers. You can pay ICE. And there are ICE officials posted at so many of the airports across the United States of America. I have friends who are traveling as well who are sending me pictures of just ICE crawling through our airports.
Our airports.
But for the essential services we need, funding the FAA, funding TSA, this man has chosen to create chaos. And the Republican Congress has also agreed to go along with this because, quite frankly, they have the numbers to actually rule, to make a decision that they will not allow this chaos to exist. And they've simply given up all their power. And so here we are with people who have missed out on 2 paychecks, who are expected to still come to work. They still have to pay their transportation to get to work. They have to pay their utilities. They have to feed themselves. They have to keep a roof over their heads. They have to pay childcare expenses and no income. It's ridiculous. While we are spending $4 million on drone interceptors or missile interceptors per interceptor. Yes.
Yes. Comrade?
Yeah, so that's a very important issue. And I think it's one of the things that's going to factor in going into the midterms. And when I say midterms, I mean, my own politics. My own politics is that these guys are part of the same corporate entity, Democrats and Republicans. But I would acknowledge that the rate of collapse has been much more accelerated with these Republicans. So that is why, on a certain level, you can actually welcome midterms as they approach. So in terms of the news, I don't think the Saudis appreciated the guy saying that the crown prince was, kissing his rear end.
I know. Saying it out loud in public.
But, that's why I am convinced I would be shocked, completely 100% shocked, if this guy can complete 3 more years at this rate. It's not an easy job. You saw what it did even to Obama, right? It aged them, we're the same age, but he's completely gray. I have all my black hair, essentially. with a few specks here and there. You see? You saw what it did to just the last 6 months of his term. So at this rate,
Completely
is it
aged out.
possible 36 more months? I doubt it. I very much doubt it. Even if they go the Soviet style, when they used to prop those guys up and hold them and claim they were standing on their own power. I don't think so. So that to me is the news. We're going to see a lot more of that kind of stuff going forward. And this is supposed to be his ally. All right, back to you.
So here, what's dominated the news is the great news that came out of New York on Wednesday, March the 25th. The headlines have been, the usual question is, why is it that Britain voted the way it did? And so, in the course of our first article, I would highlight that a little bit more. And so for that, we go to The Guardian, and it reads, the UN votes to describe slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. Members call for reparative justice as landmark resolution aims for political recognition at the highest level. The United Nations has voted to describe the transatlantic chattel slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity and calls for reparation as a concrete step towards remedying historical wrongs. We all know what the vote was. It was 123 in favor, 3 against, and 52 abstentions. The abstentions were the UK and members of the EU. So James Kariuki, the UK charter first to the UN, said Britain continues to disagree with the fundamental proposition of the text and was firmly of the view that we must not create a hierarchy of historical atrocities. No single set of atrocities should be regarded as more or less significant than the other. As the resolution went ahead in New York, the British MP, which is what I was alluding to earlier, Mel Ribeiro Addy, presented a petition to the House of Commons, pushing for a state apology by the UK for its key role in slavery and the colonialism of Africans. But there's one part here, and which is Ghana, which has been at the forefront of an effort across Africa and the Caribbean for reparatory justice, push for the terminology to be updated to reflect the lingering impact of chattel slavery. There is one more. Okay, but before Wednesday's vote, Mahama lamented the continued erasure of Black history in the US through increasing censorship of teaching the truth of slavery, segregation, and racism in schools. So, that said, you've heard 3 angles there. One is the issue of the language, how it's described, which is why the 52 abstentions happened. We can also explore how the 3 came to their conclusion that they completely were not in favor of whatever language was put before them. And finally, the issue of the erasure of Black history in the United States. Comrade.
Okay, so there's a lot going on here. You could take out the entire show. So I'm going to touch on several points, but I won't extend it too much. First of all, I feel for the British delegate. I haven't seen even an image of him, but I see his name alone. So I feel sorry for a person with that kind of name to make that statement. But then on the other hand, at least they did not vote against it. They abstained, I believe, correct?
Yeah, abstention. Yeah,
so they abstained. They did not vote against it like the United States, which is not surprising given the kind of administration we have today. And Argentina, which of course, I think it got, $15 billion from the U.S. I don't know if the final approval went through. So we can understand why Argentina would vote like that. And Israel, of course, which wants people to recognize only the Holocaust against the Jews. So that is not surprising.
Correct.
And obviously, as retaliation for what South Africa also did, which of course was the appropriate thing, and that was supported by most African countries, if not all, and the global community. So in terms of the impact, not immediate, but in the long term, it will have impact. And what do I mean? The 19 we don't have two-state solution yet, but it was one of the first UN resolutions, 1947, right? to partition the land into two, one a Jewish state, one for the
There's-
Palestinians.
Yeah.
So it's useful to have
Palestinian, yeah.
this on the record, as President Muhammad said. I agree with him totally 100%. And that's why it was useful to have the 2001 Durban Conference on racism, xenophobia, and slavery, which actually set the groundwork as well and paved the way for where we are arriving today. So kudos to Africans and supporters of Pan-Africanism who were involved in Durban and all who were involved in this particular effort. Like the fact that issue of reparations, the issue of slavery and enslavement and its impact is taking a prominent role in African narratives now. Because for the longest time, Africa had been missing. And it's appropriate that Ghana, the first African country to win its independence from Britain, is at the forefront. So I like that as well. I like the collaboration between the African Union and CARICOM. This is one of the many things that they can collaborate on. So I really like that a lot. Now, let me talk about one other aspect before I turn it to Sister. I like the framing. Even though, of course, they're focusing on let's let them put the moral thing, so long as we don't let the legal aspect get in, because that's where money becomes involved, when you accept the legal. But sometimes you have to start with what you can get, and you keep working to get to that next stage. But what I also like is the corporate framing, you see? And some people have quoted in the article, talk about how slavery and enslavement completely change the historical structure, where you have multiple societies around the world, either in feudal systems or whatever stage of development they had reached. But with enslavement and then capitalism and then turning it into corporate structures, completely change the global narrative and trajectory of history. And it impacts us even today. And let me tell you why I love this layout the most. It's going to take a while before we get nations to start cutting checks, if we get there. And I'm optimist that each generation keeps improving, and we will get there. But in the meantime, I think we can get to a stage where corporations are compelled to start cutting checks. So we can frame it as unpaid shares. Corporations have shareholders, but there's a whole generation of those who contributed to the success of the corporation who are never compensated. So these are the missing shareholders, and we want to bring them to the table, right? So that their descendants can benefit from the unpaid shares of their ancestors who are enslaved and compelled to provide uncompensated labor. So, we have smart people out there. They need to carve that narrative. And the good thing is that corporations are hated on a multiracial and multi-ethnic basis because of the way they exploit the entire world and everybody, you see? So within the exploitation, our niche needs to be recognized, and we can get more allies to drum for that. In terms of how the check will be cut, I'm not sure. People who are more involved in this can discuss that and come up with formulas. I myself would support the funding of an African bank for development, where Africans actually have money that they're already entitled to, coming from these corporations who are paying for the unpaid shares for their ancestors. So over to you, Sister.
I think that African bank, that development bank is brilliant. Great idea. And I hope we have leaders who are listening. So this story is going to tie into some of the other stories that we're going to review today. I'm thinking about how this resolution and whatever evolves out of this hopefully will even begin to impact even the stories that we've covered in the past. For instance, the issue of land in Africa and who gets to be repaid for land and things of that nature. Because if we go back to the original sin as a crime, then the spoils of the crime should also be excluded, right? So, but that's a whole other issue. still tied together. But let me address this particular article. So, for those who have not been paying attention, the United Nations voted to classify the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest, I love this terminology, the gravest crime
Yes.
against humanity.
Yes. Yes.
I love that it was led by Africans, backed by the African Union, backed by the Caribbean community. What we've been talking about on African News Review for ages is the importance of us coming together and being unified. And it explicitly calls for reparatory justice.
Yes.
So now we're going beyond just words. We're saying, if we're going to use words, we're going to use really strong language, and then we want it to be backed up by something more. So the gravest crime against humanity. So it's no longer just the slave trade, because it's the Jewish Holocaust and it's the slave trade, which gives this idea. And then we saw some of our brothers and sisters who were protesting the president of Ghana, but that's a whole other conversation. But you see us focusing on, well, what role did the African, accomplices play, as opposed to the crime itself and what that entailed. So looking at the countries that voted against, looking at the countries that abstained, Comrade, I think you were very kind to them, saying, well, at least they abstained. Evoke Martin Luther King. He said, if you try to be neutral,
You're complicit.
when you are dealing with, I'm paraphrasing, when you're dealing with issues of justice and you're saying, oh, well, I'm just going to stand on the sidelines.
True.
That is problematic. If you're going to sit on the fence, you're going to be split some kind of way, right? And so take a stand, because being neutral actually is to stand against justice, in my opinion.
Correct.
And so for them to, I'm going to abstain. No, your abstaining is a statement in and of itself. Just like when people say, oh, I didn't vote. You're not voting is a vote. So they get no pass from me. But definitely understanding this, reframing this as a crime and not just as trade, not just as an economic system. Also reframing this as a crime of global magnitude. A foundational injustice that has reshaped the modern world. Because, of course, what they've called the transatlantic slave trade, which now we are calling the gravest crime against humanity, has reshaped every aspect of the world as we know it.
Yes.
And so I think that this is so important as we talk about reclaiming our power, reclaiming language, reframing our narrative. This is so important. And then the other thing that I would say is just, again, the fact that this represents diaspora unity. Now, what would have been great is if we had, my brothers and sisters, those of us here in the United States or in Canada, being part of this. But if you understand how the UN works, you've got to have a seat at the table, right?
Yeah.
To be able to cast a vote. And so when you are represented by a white nationalist such as Trump and his regime, then you see how, even though there may be pockets of Africans in the diaspora here in the United States and maybe in other of these EU countries that would have wanted to take a stand in support of this resolution, they are now erased from the conversation because the white nationalists get to speak in that arena. And so what I would say is, for the rest of us, in all the ways that we can, if you don't agree with the vote your country cast for you on your behalf, speak up. Whatever platforms that you have, write your own articles, whatever platform you have, speak about it. What would you want your voice to say? What do you have to say about this vote? And not just, well, the United States voted this way or the UK voted this way. What is your stand? Because even though you might be, quote unquote, a numerical minority in that country that has chosen to abstain or vote against, that doesn't mean that you should allow them to erase your voice. So I'm going to just stop there for now because we have so much more that we should cover. But kudos to Ghana, kudos to the African Union, kudos to CARICOM. It is just the beginning. but it is a good start, and I'm here for it.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight. I would just like to add, in tandem with what you said with regards to the minorities being much more vocal within the MP in the UK who raised the question in the House of Commons was trying to underscore that point. That can you imagine you have a host of people of Caribbean and African descent within the UK and not just, your average Joe, but also part of the establishment. But yet, like Comrade said earlier, James Karikou is now issuing a statement that the government is not willing to accept this position. So that's one issue. One final point for me was this. Kudos to Africa, the CARICOM, and the greater diaspora. This was one unified victory. I think we have to underscore that point. The fact that we spoke and understood what the game was. What was the game? The use of language. They didn't say it was just a legal matter. They said it was a moral question. Asking that moral question made sure the world saw where everybody else stood in terms of the vote. So you saw 123 members say, on the moral issue, yes, this is the gravest atrocity. We saw how the other three voted. So we clearly know what their moral stance is on our collective humanity. And with the 52, that is matters that we can still revisit. But I'm sure I'll go out on a limb and say what they were trying to do was hedge their bets, not knowing if they agreed, that meant, okay, what did you agree to? And then, so we leave and we continue to fight another day. And like the president said, we also have to take the bulls by the horn. The issue of teaching our own history so that we know this thing, we're able to articulate what our grievances are and know what has gone before and not just be beholden to the so-called four walls to be taught. I think it was Malcolm X who said we're the only nation of people that allows our enemy to teach our children. So we need to do better. That said, we go to the next story, which is coming from France, and it's from Le Monde. And it says on the issue of this kind of atrocities that the UAE is reorganizing its arms supply network for Sudanese paramilitaries. Abu Dhabi is seeking to develop new logistic routes from Sudan's neighboring countries, such as Ethiopia, who was there. Abdi was in Abu Dhabi a couple of months ago. And now once you see that name come up, you begin to see what the issue is, such as Ethiopia and the Central African Republic, to support the rapid support forces. So we know Ethiopia is landlocked. So that's going to be problematic in terms of, but if they're using cargo planes, yes. But Central African Republic is on the coast, Atlantic coast. And so the issue of weapons being brought in can be easily, So what are we looking at? The aircraft took off just before a new barrage of Iranian missiles and drones struck United Arab Emirates on Tuesday, March 17, around 7 p.m. And an A300 cargo plane departed, most likely from Fubara airport as its transponder was switched off at the time en route Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The plane, registered in Central African Republic under TLAIT since January, previously belonged to Gerwan Airways, a subsidiary of NG9 Holding, which is partly owned by the conglomerate of the UAE president's brother, Mohammed bin Zayed. This air cargo plane company has repeatedly been flagged in the past for its involvement as an air bridge set up by Abu Dhabi to supply the Sudanese ally in the rapid support forces with weapons. You've read the story. What is your immediate take on this, comrade?
All right. So we've discussed this issue for quite a while now. The United Arab Emirates supporting the rapid support forces in the Sudan war. And we discussed how ironic that in this tragic conflict, the official national army now seems to look like the better of two wicked, evil forces.
Evil.
So we need to
Cool.
just be frank and say this is the continuation of slavery and enslavement. And, Sister has mentioned this on previous occasions, that we often don't adequately examine the Indian Ocean slave trade and the role of the Arab nations in that slavery. And this is a continuation of it, precisely. So you have the UAE who's supporting basically a force that is targeting Africans just because, they're African and they're melanated.
They're Africans. Yep.
That is obviously the leadership are fighting for the gold and the minerals, but they're selling the racist narrative, right? To incentivize
In order to get the gold.
incentivize the killers who are conducting the killing on the ground, right? And then you have the historical collaborators with slavery and enslavement. And in this case, is the leaders in the in the Central African Republic and the leaders in Chad,
Ethiopia,
who are allegedly Africans as well. And they know what the RSF is doing.
Correct. Yep.
Together with the UAE, and they're allowing it to continue, which means they don't care what is being done to Africans in this conflict. They don't care about the genocide that was shown to the entire world digitally. They're enabling it and they're supporting it. So how are they any different from the collaborators during the era of enslavement who paved the way
Correct.
and assisted
That's history.
in the enslavement of Africans? That to me is the best comment I can give on this article. Otherwise, we'll be examining the same aspects of it. The plane is coming from here, it's bringing weapons, it's taking gold. But no, we need to go beyond that. The people who are allowing it to occur. And these are the so-called presidents, of course, who don't represent the interests of ordinary Africans in their countries,
And so, linking this back to the story that we just covered, this is where the African Union, let's really have this conversation, because if we're going to go to the UN and talk about the gravest crime against humanity, we also need to be having that interfamily conversation about how we back then participated in our own oppression and how we continue to participate in our own oppression and what we're going to do to stop it. And so these presidents, these leaders, what this article is outlining, it's like this is being done in the broad daylight. There's they're not even trying to hide it or any subterfuge here. It's like, hey, we're flying in through here and we're finding different routes. And I'm actually very concerned about how this current illegal war that Trump's regime and Netanyahu's murderous administration has imposed on Iran. I'm really concerned about the impact it's going to have on Africa, because to the extent that they are bombing and destroying what they call the Middle East, they are going to need resources to rebuild. And whenever in the history of the modern world they have needed to rebuild, Africa is the place where they extract from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so what is going to happen? We see even now how ships are being rerouted and they're going around now to through the top part of Africa and so on. So our waterways are now becoming more important, and controlling our ports are more important than ever.
Correct.
Controlling those trade routes are more important than ever. And so African Union, same way we came together and were able to agree on the language for this resolution and vote en masse, we need to be having a family conversation about the things that we are continuing to do today that mirror the conditions that made it possible for our brothers and sisters, our mothers, our fathers, our children to be extracted, not to talk of our materials to be extracted back then and the continued extraction. We need to have that conversation right now. We know that the UAE has a strong interest in the gold in Sudan, in the agricultural land, in the strategic minerals. We understand that. We understand that this mirrors the colonial patterns. This is what we've been talking about. And that UAE is building global logistics empire throughout Africa through companies like DP World. And now we see us partnering with Bill Gates' company. What is it called? For them to map out where our mineral sources are. That is so insane. Why would you let somebody else that these are people who are part of the countries that are saying, no, we do not recognize your humanity. And we do not recognize the crimes we commit against you. And you're going to let them actually have more information about you than you do. Because remember, we only know what they tell us if they're the one collecting all the data. So these people are investing in ports and the shipping corridors and Red Sea access. And what UAE has been doing with RSF and so many other inroads that they're making is really positioning themselves as a regional power broker and a military and economic influencer. But how are they influencing? By keeping us at loggerheads. Because if we stay in conflict, then that allows them to walk in and take whatever they want to. And so I hope that African countries, we can continue on this trajectory of having these real conversations and really closing ranks and talking about what we need to do to create that African Development Bank so that you are not such a beggar and you're not so willing to sell out the next country or the next ethnic group just for a few crumbs from people that mean no good.
All right, so let me add to that.
Yeah.
Very briefly.
Go on.
And this is where we can play a role too. We take on a story like this, once we have identified the way the story identified the role of Chad and Central African Republic, we need to shame them. And Africans respond because we see how Africans are responding positively to the example that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are trying to set. So this is the opposite side of that type of example. So we need to start writing about this and compare them with the collaborators in our enslavement and get more Africans to start denouncing that. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other point is I agree with you totally. In fact, as I was reading it, I also tied it to the UN, the positive story from the UN. And I said to myself, Nigeria would be the logical choice. But Nigeria is politically lost right now. Ghana. So since Ghana has that momentum, we should start talking to the leadership in Ghana and say, Ghana, you should take an interest in this. We cannot allow fellow Africans to be massacred like this. Ghana, you have certain attention now focused on you because of what you led. Lead some effort in this part of Africa, whether it involves a collaboration between the African Union and the UN, come up with some resolution with deadlines, with consequences beyond the deadlines, right? How can we allow UAE, what is UAE after all, to be able to hold the entire African continent hostage like that. So those are the points I wanted to make.
It's not even up to the smallest country. Yeah, it's not even up to, in size, it's not even up to the smallest country in Africa. So, begs the question. Yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to point out. Yeah, in the article itself, like Sister said, what irked me the most was the fact that these countries were called out and none of them denied it. That is, it's one thing to say, oh, this, and say, well, the government categorically denies this because it's an investigative piece. So they would have reached out to the government, but for some reason, there wasn't the denial or, or choosing not to comment in the piece. So it goes to show that they don't really care,
Why should they care if Africans don't care?
That said, as a cold shower.
If no one is holding them accountable, we have to hold our leaders accountable. Absolutely.
Okay. Speaking of leaders.
Actually, let me add one other thing.
The next story comes from.
Let me add one other thing.
Yeah, go on.
And this is a conversation that, recently I remembered I was talking to somebody about it the other day. Many years ago, I was in this party in New York City. And I started a conversation with a brother. And at that time, that's a long time ago. That's before Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, right? And then he was talking so passionately in favor of, Patriotic Front, Mugabe, and all that.
That was the 80s.
And then he said, I just couldn't stand it. I felt anguish every time I see, white people killing fellow Africans like that, killing fellow Black people. This is an African-American brother. He said, I know we have a lot of problems. We have all these African dictators also killing Africans. But to me, it just touches me in a much more raw and painful way when I see white people killing Black people. I didn't even know how to continue the conversation after that. And I'm bringing this to say that is one of the problems that we face. If Europeans were the ones who are doing what is being done to our sisters and brothers in Sudan right now, you would see the intensity and the level of protest, right? So we also have to acknowledge that, very sadly, this internalized self-hatred plays a very big role in many of our problems.
Yeah. So speaking to which, we go to Financial Times for our next story, and which is that France, as according to Big Brother, South Africa says France withdrew G7 invitation under U.S. pressure. Trump administration has mounted sustained campaign against Pretoria, and France has withdrawn an invitation to South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa to attend this year's G7 summit, Pretoria said, in a move he attributed to pressure from the U.S. But France rescinded the invitation this month after sustained pressure from Washington, including a threat to boycott the summit, said a South African presidential spokesperson. The reason, in quote, the reason we were given was that it was due to sustained pressure from the U.S., including a threat to boycott the G7. They couldn't risk missing a key member of the G7, hence the withdrawal of the invitation, presidential spokesperson Vincent Magwena told the FT. After discussion amongst G7 members, it was collectively determined that Kenya should be invited to the summit. They added the United States welcomes Kenya participation. I don't know. Okay. First things first. Let me just throw it out there. Should Kenya attend this meeting?
I'm glad you started with that question, because we were just talking about African unity. We're just talking about African unity. We saw what happened to Venezuela, and it looked like most of the Caribbean countries just were silent. We've seen countries like Jamaica all of a sudden cut off partnerships that they had with Cuba for over 50 years. Why? Because of pressure from a man who has, it is just my upbringing that allows me to still call him a man, because I do not want to dehumanize him. But this is someone who has absolutely no moral cell in his body. He simply does not care about anybody. You cannot stand on any word that comes out of his mouth. So the fact that you would allow any kind of pressure from him to prevent you from doing what is in the best interest of your country because you're counting on, oh, then he will do what for you? Are you crazy? Everything he touches dies. Okay, but that aside, so back to your question about Kenya. Kenya and every other African country should say, go to hell. Go to hell. You don't get to pick and choose which one of us is palatable enough for you. But this is what they've always been able to do. I'm talking about these colonizers, these white nationalists.
Yeah.
Is to pit us against each other, and you will find that Negro or that African, whatever term you want to use, who's going to say, well, I can play the game. I can be, the one who will, as he will later tell them, oh, he didn't know he would have to kiss my ass.
Yeah.
He will come out in public and tell it.
Yeah.
Will Kenya say no? Probably not, because
No.
we've seen so many African leaders cave to even receiving deportees from America, from the United States of America. But should we absolutely, as a nation, as a continent, close ranks and say, if you say South Africa can't go, none of us is going? Yeah, we should. And let's see how they have their G7 meeting with the entire African continent saying, we're not trading with you again unless you start trading on our terms. Look at what Iran is doing. Look at what Iran is doing. And tell me why Africa, with all of our resources,
Okay.
I know we will have some hard times, why we cannot have a little bit more of a backbone.
No, I like it. You touch on almost all the points in a very splendid way. Of course, Kenya will go because Kenya is the typical neo-colony. Kenya, I think after South Africa, it is Kenya where all the multinational corporations are located in terms of their regional headquarters. The international organizations, the regional headquarters in Kenya, the UN agencies, the World Bank agencies, the IMF agencies are located in Kenya. So Kenya is controlled by Western and European capital. And when the great big white Bwana says, come, sadly, the African with the neo-colonized mentality will come. And of course, he wants to stand there. And that's a problem. In fact, when I read it first, I said, this is a blessing. You've been disinvited. That's actually, you should wear that like a badge of honor, right? You're the ones who have the resources that they use, right?
Correct.
And that is inviting you.
Yeah.
What you need to do is to actually make G20 and the G7 meetings very secondary in nature. So, and there are a number of ways you can do it. Before you have the annual meetings of the African Union, always make sure that that annual meeting occurs around the time of the G7 meetings. And then before the annual meeting of the African leaders, about a week before the annual meeting of the heads of state, you have an African Union conference just for businesses, right? Where you're showcasing Africa's resources. And of course, you're not going to allow them to bid for it because you're going to have an AU set. This is the rate already by that time. And then you invite the chiefs of these largest corporations that they have. Which conference do you think these European leaders would prefer to attend? The G7 or the African Business Conference prior to the African Union Heads of State Conference on an annual basis? You will destroy this conference, which is completely irrelevant, but because you're thinking within the box, you're not able to see that this conference is nothing. We need to start using our brains,
I was even going to add,
if anybody is listening, they really need to hire Comrade Milton. No, seriously. In terms of when we talk, when we talk about having think tanks, and groups of people who are sitting and looking at strategy and coming up with ideas and coming up with game plans, and then you have people who implement, he would be amazing to head such a think tank. Because what we need are
But we're
solutions.
building something right here, sister. All of us, collective.
We are. They need to hear you. They need to hear you. And then they need to put some resources behind it so that you have all your books and your research assistants and all of that. And we can put out these
Understood.
papers and these thoughts pieces. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we are letting
I
them
was
play
even going to
games with us.
mention,
We should.
Yeah.
Exactly. Using the game analogy, the point is, why is Kenya there? Kenya cannot even afford to pay its way. You're effectively telling a member of the BRICS that it's the mind boggles.
But he
and
wants
then
to be
Kenya
seen
would
there,
say,
standing, that I have arrived. Look, I'm standing next to
but you're broke.
all these Europeans. I'm the chosen one. Look.
But
Master is petting my head.
But you're broke. For want of a better word, you're broke. There was one sad picture I pray not to see.
Adesoji, you just don't get it. I'm broke, but I'm respected by Europeans. Otherwise, I would not be here.
They might give him a sash or a sword. They've been doing that for centuries. They give you some little memento and you go look at. They think I'm amazing. Didn't they just do that with Tinubu? He gets a state dinner and he signs over our steel and he signs over jobs and what did Nigeria get out of that deal?
Yeah, but he got to sit near that.
While King Charles had to hold him up to make sure he didn't fall on his face.
There was, you speak of the state visit. There was this part where King Charles I was toasting his delegation, and he said, "Well, I have to send you this toast that I do believe Nigeria doesn't carry last." And you can see the laugh. I'm like, "What are you laughing about? What is funny? There is nothing there is nothing hilarious. You're basically being given the shutdown.
Basically trolling in his face.
Adesoji is an envious hater because he wasn't sitting next to King Charles.
The guy was just grinning. He was just, when you're beaming, I was like, why are you beaming? What is funny?
Listen, I know that there are many people who are going to watch this who are going to agree that you are a hater, because whenever they come out with those awards that they give, when they knight people and they give lady or some awards that they give, I see some of my African friends, but they're like, "Oh, they just gave me this award. UK Gazette told me I'm amazing," or whatever. And they're so proud of it. And I'm like, these are your colonizers.
I'm a Barbara now.
These are the people who rape them to your country.
You can call me
I'm a
Barbara Milton.
Yeah, I'm a duke. There was this picture of, what's his name? The president of Kenya. What's his name again?
Ruto?
Yeah, Ruto. You remember when he came to the Washington, D.C. and he got to sit in Biden's chair? If you go look at that picture and he was grinning, I was like, what is wrong with you?
Yep. I've arrived.
What is wrong with you? Yeah. Oh my God, it's amazing. It's just, we do. Okay. Minded us to keep time. Yes, if this is your first time of joining us for African News Review, do subscribe, because we're looking to get the numbers up. The more numbers means we can actually do this on a grander scale. So yes, do share, and subscribe, and bring people, as they say. And so for our final story, it's the time moves fast. It's from the BBC, yes, British Broadcasting Corporation. And it is that Namibia, tiny old Namibia, which is tiny by economics means, of course. Elon Musk, Starlink has been blocked for operating in Namibia. And the story goes, Namibia has rejected an application by Elon Musk-owned Starlink for a license to provide satellite internet services in the country, dealing the country a second setback in Southern Africa. One will recall in South Africa, he was told no. And so this story also stems from the fact that Mr. Musk believes, according to the Communications Regulatory Authority of Namibia, CRAN, the decision, without giving reasons for his refusal, but noted Starlink's Namibian subsidiary did not have local ownership, which is the same thing with South Africa, where the issue of the black, what's it called again? The black entrepreneurial,
Black
what's it
empowerment.
called? Enterprise B, black empowerment, was flouted by his bid. So again, we see the same thing happening in Namibia. I'm minded to think, yes, he does operate everywhere else. Do we take that as a understanding that local ownership is not an issue for those countries?
First and foremost, let's give flowers where they're due. Amandla, listen, I am so excited for Ntumbo Nandi Ndaitwa. This sister, this president of Namibia, is taking no prisoners. And we don't hear enough about her. We talk about Traore, but we need to be talking about this sister.
I agree.
Because she is fighting the good fight. Okay? And she is showing what it means to be a mother, to be a woman, to be a warrior, to be a political leader, to be a strategist, and to be fearless. So everything off to my great mother, great sister. She's probably not that much older than me. Having said
She's
that,
way older than you.
Well, having said, you think, you don't know.
She's 71. She was part of the, what's it called?
You
She's
don't know how old I am. Let's not have this conversation.
Let the sister go. No, I agree. I love this sister in Namibia. Please continue.
Good.
Said that. Again, this ties in with all the conversations we've been having about the gravest crime against humanity, the idea of having an African Development Bank, the idea of, no, you colonizers cannot keep raping and pillaging us with what UAE and other people are trying to do. Yes, you absolutely, in your own country, have the right to say, no, you don't get to come in. We're talking about data. We're talking about Starlink. You can spy on everything and just run roughshod in our country. And yes, you will have 51% ownership that is local. And if you can't abide by our laws, guess what? Get out of Dodge. And no, it's not because you're white. It's because these are our laws. So anywhere else they go, here in the United States, they have laws I have to abide by. They have all their kind of systems and they have what we can and cannot do. So what happened? What makes it all of a sudden when Africans when we want to impose our own agency, now it has to be, now he's crying racism. So now back to the question that you asked about the other countries, probably led by some spineless leaders who do not think strategically. They're the same ones signing memorandums of understanding with Trump and Marco Rubio, and not even looking at the fine print of what they're signing in a way. They're the same ones signing for China and all these other countries to have 25-year access to their ports for pennies. So I'm glad for the example that she's setting. I hope more countries will take a look at what she and South Africa are doing, and impose the same kind of restrictions.
Okay, so I love all those points, and also I want to show something they should start pointing out whenever they're asked these questions. Talking about leaders like her. In the U.S., did they not force the Chinese owner of TikTok to sell to an American? 100%?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it's fine for the
Yeah.
U.S.
Hello.
Laws, as you said, but Africans cannot have laws in their national security interest. You can't have your cake and eat it too. There's certain microchips the U.S. corporations are not allowed to sell to China. Think about that. You're talking about free trade. Free trade except you have more exceptions than free trade. So this is absolutely nonsense. Namibians are doing the right thing, but it raises other issues as well. We need to support the sister because I'm sure she's thinking of doing this. In Namibia, the European population is 2%. They still own 70% of the land. The sister's only been there, I think, less than a year or maybe a year now, and I'm sure this is on her agenda.
Just a year.
So we need to support her.
Just a year.
Because I know if she's coming up, standing firm on this issue, she's going to tackle that issue. And then the second point I want to make is this. I love this requirement. 51%, she's not even asking for 100%, like the US did with TikTok. But then I realized that we are calling this empowerment, right? Empowering Africans. So we need to introduce this across many industries in Africa, not only when a Musk comes around. In all these countries, they have investments, right? Are they subject to the same types of regulations, 51%, so that more and more Africans can become shareholders into these entities? So I'm thinking beyond just Namibia now. All right, so those are my comments.
Traore just imposed, if you want to do business in his country, like if you're doing a certain amount of business in his country,
You have to set
then
up
you have to be headquartered in his country.
Very good.
So you have to now, you have to invest a certain amount of money in terms of infrastructure and where your people work and where they live and so on and so forth. Nigeria has a version of that as well. And so there were actually some multinational companies that closed down because they had a lot of multinationals who were running the companies and did not live in Nigeria. And then they would just have minions in Nigeria, but they were basically running the from outside of the country, but extracting from the country. So there are more African countries that are starting to look at that and make those kind of decisions, and I hope more of them do so.
And you just gave me another thought.
Yes.
As I'm listening to you, you just gave me another thought.
Okay.
They're making Africans now post bonds, right? When they apply for visas, right? Now, so
Yes.
if you want to even be considered to do investment in my country, I want you to post a bond as well. That's what they should start doing as well. And that will absolutely, that will bring them a lot of revenue. It means that any potential investor who's coming is actually serious because they're asked to demonstrate the seriousness. Put your money.
You know what I'm going to say, and anyone that you have coming to work, your company is bringing to work, you post a bond for them.
There you go.
So if they leave a baby behind,
there you go.
We can access that money to. That's the other thing that they're doing. They're coming and impregnating.
We have to think outside the box. Now we're talking. Many of these leaders are playing with power. They don't understand the potential of the power they have. I love that.
And there's also one other angle to this. It's that here is a leader who is telling us that there is a better way of doing business in Africa. And men who have been on the stool for however long have decided the opposite was going to be the order of business.
At this point, you're going in a long way to explain it. You could simply say, she's telling us we need more women presidents. That's what she's saying. And I agree with her. I agree with her 100%.
Yeah, more women presidents. Yeah, one women president.
Say altogether, we need more leaders with decolonized minds.
Yes, very much.
Whatever the gender is, we need. Of course, I'm going to advocate for more women, but I do need women with decolonized minds because, of course, we have my sister in Tanzania, who is.
We don't need her. You're right. We don't need her. You're right.
We don't need her. We don't need her.
Okay. The Namibian president, but not the Tanzanian president.
No, not the Tanzanian one. No.
Okay. That said, we've come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. And before we go, Wednesday, we're looking at We tried, but due to technical hitches, we couldn't bring you Queen Mother More, Women and Resistance with Queen Mother More. So, but we'll have another stab at it this Wednesday. So join us 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
And she did a lot of work with African leaders as well.
Yes.
So you might want to come and understand the connections.
And also, again, before we go, I would like to thank June Liggins for the super chat. Thank you. Your contribution, as with every other person's here, just contribute to keep the lights on. And yeah, thank you very much for extending the hand of generosity. And so I must thank the good comrade, Mrs. Eneli, for taking time of their busy Sunday to sit with us, have this conversation, which is something we ought to be doing on a regular basis, not just on Sunday, but every other time that we meet. And so I'll give them the final word. So, sisters first, your thoughts?
The struggle continues, but we will win.
We will.
Okay, optimism.
No, we will.
I
agree 100%. Each generation should advance the struggle. We're inspired by our great ancestors, really. So we should also try to set some examples that can inspire the next ones too. So a luta continua.
Victoria Seta. Thank you very much. And until next week, it's good night and God bless.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.